Hey FlossTube, it's Donna Ray. Welcome to my channel. If you're a first-time visitor, I am so glad that you're here. If you're returning, welcome back. It's good to see you. I started my channel about 3 months ago. This is my 10th episode. What a milestone in this journey. I'm so thrilled that you all take the time to visit my channel, to sit and have tea and stitch with me, to leave comments, to like my videos. Thank you so much. It has meant more to me than I can express to you, your support and your encouragement over these last episodes. So here we are at number 10. Before we get started, I wanted to say one thank you. It's been a particularly hard week. I have a very dear friend who's quite ill. And during this week, I've been praying hard for her and really thinking about her and her family. And in the week, I got a little something in the mail. Hang on. I got this precious, precious card from Amy of Amy Loves Toads. And it says, "You're a dear little thing." Amy, thank you. But along with this, I don't know if you saw in Amy's video, she'd been doing this sampler that had all of these beautiful letters and nature motifs, and she wasn't feeling it anymore. And so she decided to cut it apart into little individual pillows. And don't you know, Amy, thank you. My dear friend Amy sent me the bee. And this arrived this week right when I needed it. And I'm so thankful for it. Amy, you're a dear little thing yourself. And this really, really cheered me. So thank you. As I said, this is my 10th video. And I wanted to do something extra special to celebrate. If you remember my friend Pat Ryan, she's a stitcher, an author, a historian, a lecturer. She is R R Reproductions linen. I mean, she's an amazing woman. We just love her, right? And so I had her on a few episodes ago to do a tutorial on ironing our needlework. And the response to that video was overwhelming. There were so many great comments and so many of you asking Pat different questions. And I'm bowled over by that because I love Pat and I love all of her experience and her wisdom. So I asked Pat if she would be willing to come back for another episode and talk to us about samplers. She kind of wrote the book. The title of the book is Historic Samplers. And so I asked her if she would come back and talk to us about samplers, and she agreed. So for this episode, it's going to be my chat with Pat Ryan about samplers. I mean, we all love samplers, right? We admire them, we collect the charts, we stitch them, some of us visit museums and historic homes to track them down. And so Pat's going to give us a little bit of the scoop on antique samplers. She's sharing with us in this video some of theirs from the 1700s and giving us tidbits of information that we may never have known. So, without any further fuss, here we go with Pat Ryan chatting about antique samplers.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath.
Deep breath.
Hey everybody, it's Donna Ray. I'm back with my good friend Pat Ryan, and she's come back today to talk to us about samplers. And remember, she literally wrote the book. So she's going to tell us about samplers today. I know a lot of you are really into samplers right now. Bendy Stitchy, Lori at Mischievous Stitches, Lynette and I love samplers. Emily C., you do some beautiful ones. Kindred Stitcher, Lisa. So many of us just love samplers. So, Pat, what is a sampler?
Well, what was a sampler done for? Let's start with that.
Let's start with that.
In the 1500s, the very long, thin samplers, sort of like that one, which would be way longer than that, but very much thin. The reason it was thin was that's what the loom could accommodate, but it would go maybe 40 inches long.
Wow.
Okay, but they weren't alphabets and all. It was all done in design.
Okay.
The designs were fashion.
Ah.
So you had a cuff with a beautiful design on it. And I would say to you, may I borrow it? Well, your cuff was detachable. I would take your cuff home and I would reproduce it on that piece of cloth.
Really?
And you would fill it over a period of time, not a year, but several years. The biggest one, or the most famous one like this, is Mary Hollingworth. And she comes out of Massachusetts, Salem, and it's about 40 inches long. The top two panels are very, very ornate. They're ornate because they were the corners of her shawl that she reproduced.
Okay.
And then she came down with all these different designs. At the bottom, she did put an alphabet and she did put her name. That got her into a lot of trouble because she was educated enough to know her alphabet and to write her name. And that was one of the reasons she ended up in jail as one of the witches at the Salem witch trial.
Aha.
Actually, it was because they were fearful of her education, and her husband was an extremely wealthy man. So he was able to pay for her to be in a better part of the prison and taken care of better. But she was in prison for 2 years.
Oh my goodness.
But that's how they started. They started as a fashion plate.
Kind of a history.
Or, I want to put a design on something. Let me pull this out and look at it. Okay.
So kind of a template.
Sort of, yes.
Okay.
And then after that, we brought it into let's make an alphabet. Okay, so a marking sampler, you would only have one alphabet. And it would be a very plain alphabet. And you sometimes see them A, B, B, C, C. If you really look close, one of the letters on that are always, there's a problem with it. Because it's the first one they copy, and then they correct it on the second one.
Aha.
That's a marking sampler.
Okay.
Okay, and then we go further, and we get into samplers like this. And this is Elizabeth Wilton from 1769, and she even tells us that she says her sample cloth, and she has age 10, May 31st, 1769, God Save the King.
Wow.
So, who is the king? King George III.
Okay.
So, we didn't like him very much, but that's just tough. All right, so when you look at the top row, you see that the alphabet changes design. What you did with these was you did different alphabets for the different places you are going to put your initials on linen. Every piece of linen in your home would have a set of initials for the owner on it.
Okay.
Whether you did them for you, your husband, your kids, your mother, your father, whatever, and the number 1 through 7, which was for the 7 days of the week. And the reason that was done was so you rotated your linens so you didn't wear one out. It was harder to reproduce one piece of fabric, of pantaloons, whatever, than a whole group of it.
Okay.
And we know this by going through inventories and seeing Lydia had 1, 3, 5, and 8 chemises. She had money. She had more than 7.
Wow. Wow.
Okay, so the rest of them were gone for whatever reason. They were used up. They were given to somebody else, whatever. So if you look up here, you have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, K, L, M, N, O, P.
So where's the J?
Q, R, S, T, V, W, X, Y, Z. In the alphabet, the German alphabet, which is the alphabet that we use, before 1750, there was no I and there was no U. They were interchangeable. I and J and U and V were interchangeable.
Aha.
So you always, if you were Joanne, before 1750, it would look like I-O-A-N-N-E. It wouldn't look like that. It would look like an I.
So that explains why, on a lot of antique samplers and some reproductions that people have done of those samplers, those letters are missing.
Yes, and they're missing because they weren't there. Sometimes you're going to see a sampler where they are actually in there later on. Now she's a little late to have those missing,
Okay.
but she might have copied from her mother's or her grandmother's sampler,
Right.
which is why she didn't add the extra letters in.
I'm going to have you hold this.
Sure.
And I'm going to bring us in a little closer.
So,
And just for the record, we bought this online on eBay, which you certainly can buy samplers on eBay. My only cautionary tale to you is do not buy them if they won't take them back. Because
wow.
if for some reason it's not what you thought it would be or not what it was represented, if you can't send it back and you pay $300, $400, $500, $600, $700 for it, you're not going to be happy.
Wow.
But
Can you hold that up just a little bit for us? Oh, that's gorgeous. So those colors, they
That's-
have to be faded. So what would they have looked like?
brighter, but not maybe that much brighter. And that's because of the way it was stored. Both in England and the United States, they used what looked like a rolling pin that had a slot in it.
Okay.
And you put your sampler in the slot and rolled it up.
Wow.
Well, you put it in a drawer, what would happen? When you put something cylindrical in a drawer, it rolls.
Yes.
So whichever way it was put in there and rolled would be the way it would fade.
Okay.
So sometimes the back is more faded, sometimes the front is more faded, and sometimes parts of each part of the sampler are faded differently on front and back. But
That
you can
is pretty
tell this
amazing.
is English or somewhere over in the British Isles. We know it's English because this was probably a brighter red or rust color back then because they knew how to keep that color in. Remember the English soldiers' uniforms were really red. They didn't fade.
Mm-hmm.
They were called lobster backs.
Wow.
Okay, so they knew how to keep that color in. We did not. And until we went through the Revolutionary War, we had nobody that could tell us because the English wanted to take our raw silk, they wanted to dye it, sell it back to us, and get more money.
Aha.
So they weren't going to say, oh, this is how we do it. And if you use cranberries was a great color for about 6 months, and then it would fade out to a white or a cream. If you look on the back, you can probably see little snippets of where it was red, but it won't be red. It could be a light pink on the unfaded side, but it won't keep its really red color.
Stinkers.
Red comes from the cochineal beetle, which is from South America. You have to squish around 50,000 female beetles.
Not
now,
males.
how you know whether they're female or not, I don't know. To get 1 drop of red dye, to make an ounce, 50,000 beetles have to be smushed. So red dye was extremely, extremely expensive.
Yes.
The Scottish used it more than anybody else. And why that is, I don't know, but they had it down and they used it more than anyone else. But after the Revolutionary War, this company called Dolphus Miggs Company taught us how to make the red.
Yay.
You all use Dolphus Miggs almost all the time. It's DMC. And they have been in business since 1789.
Fun fact. DMC.
DMC is Dolphus Miggs.
All right, Pat. Tell us about this sampler.
All right, I purposely did this one. It's unframed. It's from 1774. And you can see it's not the most beautiful sampler in the world, but this is your AA, BB, CC, DD, all up at the top that she did to show. And again, we have not all the letters in the alphabet, just like before. But that's how she decided to do it. And like I said, she was probably copying from somebody else. But you can see there's like dirt, could be old blood right here on this piece.
I see.
Okay, and there's some blue, there's, not real beautiful colors. So this little girl, Mary, wanted a little tiny bit of red in her piece. And there's the little tiny bit of red right here. One little tiny 4-stitch
little dot.
motif.
Oh my
right there.
goodness.
And you can see on the back it's still just as red as it is on the front. Now the rest of it, this probably was this way, when it went in. So there's not that much different front to
But look
back.
at that blue. That really
Yep.
shows up so much
Yep.
nicer on the back.
So she probably put it in the opposite way
Mm-hmm.
when she did her piece. So there, you know, it's dirty. It's got smush marks on it. If you don't like that, don't buy one like this. To me, that's a badge of honor. 1774, girls. You know, it's 2018.
Right.
It should have a little bit of wear and tear. It's the badge of honor.
Yes.
This piece is as old as it says it is.
Yes.
But I just wanted you all to see the back. English children were very neat stitchers. They were neat stitchers because they could go buy more thread. In the United States, not so much. Because one trip into town per year or every 6 months was probably all you got. So to go from here to here wouldn't be, well, so what, you know? So you have long threads hanging and all that. They didn't care. But the English girls were very precise because they could actually go back and buy more thread.
Aha.
So whether your back is not, you know, neat or not, doesn't mean that it isn't old.
Right.
What it means is that this one particularly is English. All these samplers actually today are English.
Wow.
So this one, I love this one. This one is Hannah Rainfort, and she's from 1776. And you'll notice on this piece, she was into crowns. Now, what little girl doesn't love a crown?
Right.
The thing that most people don't know is there were actual books with alphabets in it for little girls to use when they were stitching. And when the printer ran out of alphabet, they would add crowns in. Now, just for a space saver or little designs. Well, what little girl doesn't think she's a princess, royal or not, and isn't going to use them? The English, the only thing they might do is to tell you whose crown it is, but they would never put their own initials under the crown. That would be disrespectful. The Scottish actually put their initials under the crowns. They wanted to be disrespectful.
Oh.
They never forgave Elizabeth for killing off Mary, Queen of Scots. So they put their own initials underneath in their samplers under the crowns. Maybe a 50 count.
Okay.
So
It's
and
gorgeous.
this actually has H-I-J-K. It doesn't have the V and the U in there, but it has the other. So it's coming closer to what we would recognize as the alphabet today.
Yep.
And the more numbers they knew, the more educated they were.
Ah.
So, you know, sometimes they would add numbers just to show you that they were that much more educated. Because remember,
Fantastic.
girls, they couldn't own anything. They, you know, they were the chattel of marriage. So for them to be educated was sort of a waste of time. So to be educated, they wanted you to know they were educated.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Good for them.
Yeah. All right, so that's 1778. This one is very English with a pastoral
Wow.
view.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
And her name is Rose Robinson, and she actually tells you her teacher's name, R. Lewis. And a lot of samplers do not tell you the teacher's name, so it's always some fun to get one that actually tells you that. But this little girl says, "With care and pains the piece I wrought, and finished with a virgin thought." Now, who couldn't resist that? Honest to goodness. Really, that says it all, doesn't
A
it?
virgin thought.
A virgin thought.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Really, I mean, okay. Almost everything on a piece, crowns included, means something. There's reasons for all of it. So on this piece, you have a peacock. Do you know what a peacock would be for? Vanity. Because they preens, so it would be vain or vanity. The lion is for loyalty, but also the British lion. So she made him pink so that we would see it. And you notice there's a lot of red in here, and it's still pretty good red. So that's good. It does have some holes, but the holes aren't in any place that would really be a problem. A cat is mischievous, but also sneaky.
Ooh.
Sorry, girls, if you like cats, I'm not, not dishing on cats. I'm just telling you what they use as a representative of. When you have a vase with flowers in it, okay, what's a woman supposed to do back in those days? Reproduce.
Mm.
Bloom where you're planted. You
Okay.
want to have children. That was your main thing in life, to produce children.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of children, because you had a lot of things that needed to be done and you needed children to help you with them.
Mm-hmm.
So doing that, a strawberry is for the sweetness of life,
Wow.
because it's a sweet thing. Remember, they didn't have candy bars and all of that, so that was the sweetness of life. For the most part, a sampler like this would take approximately 1 year to do.
Oh my goodness. So I
Okay.
don't have to feel bad about
No.
my whips.
No.
Okay.
1 year at least for them to do this. And it was done, in this country and in England, you went to either a seminary, a girls' female seminary, or you went to a local woman who probably was only having this to get enough money for a dowry. She would have her little school for a short length of time, and then she would marry somebody, and that would maybe be the end of her career.
I see.
Okay, so there's a sampler I reproduced a long time ago that said, "Happy the woman who can find constant employment in her mind. She for amusement need not roam, her pleasure center in her home." That's enough to gag you. Okay, and to make it worse, she was 7 years old.
Oh my goodness.
So this is what they were taught. You were taught to be pleasing to your husband, to make a good home, to know enough to be able to take care of his linens and all of that. In the United States, when you finished a sampler and your quilt, that was the advertisement. You were ready to be married. And they would be displayed in the front room, whether it was a marking
my
sampler
goodness.
or this, which would be considered a show sampler. This would not have been her first piece, obviously. So when they were put in there, the man could come in and make sure that you were proficient in the arts to do for him whatever. Not that they would know stitches or any of that, but at least he knew you could quilt and you could do what you had to do to mark the linens.
That's amazing.
So your linen markings, like your alphabets, if you did a scrolly alphabet, that was probably for your collar.
Ah, okay.
Okay, a plain alphabet was probably for your undies.
Oh.
And everything in between. So when people say, God, how many alphabets did you have to have? It all depends on if they changed the styling of them. It was so that they had a multitude of alphabets to actually pick from to mark their pieces.
Wow.
Because you might have it on a tablecloth, you might have it here, there, or everywhere. You didn't want to use the same set of initials the whole time.
Right.
You wanted to be able to change it.
Right.
So we're up to 1778. This is 1779.
Okay.
And her name is Barbara.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I didn't know
Yeah.
that was an older name.
Barbara. And you notice, and it's hard to see, so I have to try and come in. She has K, B, I don't know if that's an M, an E. So we have the king, we have a bishop, we have a marquis, and an earl. Interestingly, no queen.
Wow.
So,
That's
and
pretty
she has little
amazing.
flowers, and she does have the J in hers, but no U again. And she has a Roman numeral number, which is always kind of fun, but her numbers go up to 19.
Oh,
So,
wow.
You know, she's kind of the
So-
gal around town.
So again, that's an indication that she has more linens, more things to rotate out.
But also that she was highly educated in that she could go past
She could
the number
count that.
7.
Aha, I
Yeah,
see.
You know,
She could count that
She
high.
could count past that, because think about it, you have 10 fingers, but you only had 7 days in a week. So if you could go past 7, wow, you and write your name, which she could do both.
That's pretty amazing.
So that's pretty amazing. You're going to come across a lot of samplers that have no name because the child couldn't spell her name. She couldn't read. A lot of them put verses on their samplers, like this next piece that I'm going to show you.
Okay.
Okay. Now, a lot of samplers, as we go through, not only were they schoolgirl samplers, but they put a verse on there. that they wanted the girl to take to heart. Some of them are just pretty and some of them aren't. A lot of times these girls couldn't read it. If you asked them to pick out a word in it, they would have to go through the whole piece to get to that word. They wouldn't know the word on its own.
Okay.
Which is, so they were illiterate for the most part. I would think Margaret might not have been. But she actually has all the letters in her alphabet. And if you notice, she's got really deep red and she's got pink. So she's got some money, which is kind of fun. Okay. So this sampler has actually been mended. And it's been mended almost in the same color as the linen background, which didn't bother me at all. I love the sampler. I love the date. And it is September 11th, 1788, which of course wouldn't have significance for anybody really up until recent times. But it has been mended, and the person I bought it from was very particular about saying that it had been mended. Okay, and that should be the way, if you're going to get it, you should be able to see all the warts on the piece as well. Doesn't bother me, again, it just adds to the personality of the piece.
So that mending right there.
There's mending here, and there's mending down in here.
That is amazing.
And way down in the border. But they did a pretty good job of it.
Yep. All right, Pat, who's this?
This is Ann Harper from 1790. And actually, Ann and I purchased this sampler to actually reproduce for one of the Shepherd's Bush retreats way back, almost the beginning of the retreats we did out in Salt Lake. So let me just talk about her for a minute, and then we're going to talk about reproductions.
Okay.
So you can't read it, but this is Lamb of God, and this is a verse up here, which would have probably been a pink, like maybe a little lighter pink than the little robin's breasts.
Ah, okay.
And we loved it because, of course, Anne is a robin, so you have to have robins at least in a couple of pieces.
So let's chat about that for a second. I find it interesting when you and Anne find these amazing samplers, antique samplers. You often buy them for the name that's stitched in, or meaningful things, just like you said, Anne is Anne Robbins.
Yep, dates.
And this one actually says Anne and has Robbins stitched in, significant dates. I think that's a really interesting way to go about purchasing your antique samplers.
And maybe it's the colors that attract you, you know, maybe it's the timing. I mean, these are our 1700 samplers, but we have them up through the 1800s.
Okay.
We even have an 1884 and 1890. It's all in what you see and what you like.
Right.
Not everybody can reproduce every sampler out there.
Right.
And let's talk for a minute about reproductions. If you went to a museum, which is what I did back in the day, and then Ann and I did, when you go to a museum and reproduce a sampler, that means the sampler has to be within 1 inch of the original size of the piece that you're reproducing.
Wow.
If it is not, then it is an adaptation. It is no longer a reproduction.
Okay.
That's an inaccurate statement to say that it is. It is not.
Okay.
Okay? And you want to reproduce it with as much authenticity as to color as you can. The only thing that we cannot reproduce today that was used back then was used mostly in samplers in Salem and places where people came in from the China trade is a silk called crinkle silk.
Oh.
And that silk actually has little crinkles in it.
Oh.
And they used it in long stitches for water. And it has a funny sheen to it that actually gives you a feeling of emotion of water.
Oh, I bet that's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And it's stuff that was brought back in the China trade from fathers, uncles, brothers, cousins, whatever. In New England, you did not use the color red voluntarily because it was the sign of the devil.
Ah.
Okay, but being that we were very, very parsimonious, if you were given that color, God forbid you would throw it out, you got to use it. So I'm sure you prayed that somebody would bring you red thread. Sometimes also you will see a sampler and the whole sampler is done in a multitude of color. And none of the colors seem to match. That's called the sewing box sampler. And what that is, any piece of thread about that long was picked up off the floor and put into an ort jar. Ort being any kind of scrap of meat or anything else.
Okay.
Okay, you could sew a button on with that. But
Sure.
somebody with no money could do an alphabet with all the different little pieces of thread.
Aha.
And maybe half your A would be a pink and the rest would be a blue or a purple. The next one, so they might not even be a full letter of a color.
Right.
But that's what they would use, and it was called the sewing box sampler. So if you go to a museum and you see a pincushion and that pincushion is flat, but they say to you, oh, this is a pincushion, and you go, yeah, how could it have been? It doesn't have anything in it. They stuffed it with those little pieces of thread, and over time they disintegrated.
Oh my goodness.
So if you went to a dame school, which was the local school, the children who were too young to stitch would crawl along the floor and pick up all the little pieces of thread, and they would put them in this communal basket to be used for stuffing or adding. You know, you get down to the last 3 stitches, you don't have enough. What do? You go in there, you pull out a thread, and you finish your piece. So that all adds to why your colors are the way they are. And you're going to find sewing box samplers far more in the United States, where they use cotton thread, or they used a thread that was not very pretty, maybe a brown or something like that, that we could dye easily. The color we couldn't get was black. We use black walnuts. Ladies, don't dye with black walnut. It's so acidic. You're not going to have a sampler for somebody in the next generation or 2 down. So, you know, you could get black a lot of ways. Black walnut is not the way to do it. Don't sprinkle crystals on it and all that, unless you don't care that it's not going to be around in 10 or 15 years. No offense, my time's way more valuable than to sprinkle that on thinking it's going to last, and it's not.
Right, right.
So you take your piece to a museum after you reproduced it, they lay them next to the piece, and they decide, is this good, is this bad, do we like it, we don't like it. You don't overdye a piece after you've reproduced it for a museum. You just do the work, you take it, they say, yep, nope, this color right here, you need to change that. So you have to take all that out and change it to whatever color they think. And once they've approved it, it is now saleable with their name on it. They sanction it. Okay? Not everybody follows these rules, but if you were to go to a museum, those are the rules that are to be followed.
So what about then, there are lots of reproductions out there from antique samplers that people have purchased. How does that process work?
They can do whatever they want. If they own the piece, a lot of people don't think that samplers should be reproduced. It devalues them. I don't believe that.
Okay.
So if somebody buys a sampler and reproduces it, first of all, how are you going to know if it's accurate or not unless they picture it? So you really aren't.
Right.
DMC, believe it or not, most closely approximates old silk or the cotton that the little girls used. They used what would come closest to a buttonhole twist. If you have your grandmother's old sewing things, that buttonhole twist is what looks like what they used more than anything.
Okay.
If you had a lot of money, yeah, you used silk. But think about it, a lot of these little girls didn't have that kind of money. And what they could buy, they bought at the local person dyer's shop. And when you went on the eaves, she would have like a whole range of green. From the very darkest green that went in the dye pot first to the very lightest green, which was the last in the dye pot. It might have taken her 3 days to get there. Okay, so there are dye pot samplers. When they went the first time, they bought the darkest green. When they went back 6 months later and needed more, they ended up with the medium green. And at the end, they ended up with the lightest green because that was what was left. So that's another kind of a sampler.
Interesting.
So they're not just genealogy samplers and all that. They're also depending on what fabric and fiber you've used. Yes, the little girls on Nantucket actually stitched on silk gauze. But remember, girls, they were the creme de la creme.
Yes.
And they had the money and the time. And most little girls went to dame school. You learned to play an instrument. You learned to set a table. All that. You might have stitched for 15 or 20 minutes a day. All right, so they might have done different kind of stitches. In the north, they didn't do that many stitches. They didn't have anybody who could teach them different stitches. And not everybody can read a book and just sit down and do the stitches. They need somebody to do it to show them. In the South, the interesting thing was in the South, the boys would be educated to go to England to go to college. Until we had a lot of colleges here, like William and Mary and all that, Harvard, Yale. Other than that, we didn't have a lot of colleges. So they would go to England to go to Oxford, Cambridge, whatever. They would bring a tutor over to tutor the boys to get ready to go to England to not only learn, but to know the customs. Those plantation owners didn't want their little girls sullied by an Englishman. So they made them bring either their fiance or their wife with them.
The tutor.
The tutor had to bring a fiance or a wife with him. She would be far more of a needlewoman.
Yes.
So each plantation, one plantation made nails, one plantation made whatever, one plantation was where the little girls went to school. And that woman would teach them. So they knew far more stitches than the rest.
Yes.
Okay? So it was interesting, like a Smyrna cross. It's also called the William and Mary.
Really?
William laid down, Mary laid on top of him.
Oh my God.
Honest to God, that's how they described it. Not
Oh,
a
that's
queen
funny.
stitch. After the Revolution, we didn't want anything to do with the monarchy. We changed the name to the French, the Rococo stitch. So certain stitches do have secondary names because of history and the way things flowed. So going back to the little girls, so if you were Southern, you might know more stitches than you would know if you were Northern.
I see.
But think about it. When you do an eyelet, you have to pull. All right, when you're 7, 8 years old, you might start pulling, but by the end of that half hour, you're not pulling so much anymore. And an eyelet, an Algerian eye is the eye of God. Eyes are supposed to be open. But on a lot of them, they won't. You'll see where they are open, then they fade to not open, then they're open. So you can almost see how much progress they made in one session.
Isn't that interesting? Because as I stitch them, I always don't want them to be open. I feel like I'm pulling too hard.
No, you want them to be as open as you can get them.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah. So those little girls, you can see their progression by how much or how little that they pulled.
Wow.
You know, and maybe it was just an off day and they didn't pull at all, but you can see a progression across the piece as they stitch.
That's fascinating. So now, why was it always little girls? Did we not stitch stitch samplers and things as we got older? Was this part of their education?
They didn't. If you were a working wife on a farm, no, you didn't probably stitch another sampler. You might do a show sampler if you had some money, like Quakers, merchants, people like that would do a second sampler, which would be a show sampler, not just your alphabet. But for most of these kids, knowing how to mark their linens was the biggest thing they needed to know for.
Right.
If you had a lot of money and you went to a female seminary, you might have done the mourning, the death samplers where they're laying over their the gravestone and all that, crying and all of that. The ultimate act of Victorian mourning was to cut your hair and stitch with it, because the Victorians didn't cut their hair except when there was a death in the family.
Wow.
And sometimes there'll be little people on there, and if you look, they're different color hairs. Each of the people in the family cut their hair, and the person doing the piece would actually stitch their hair into the little people.
Oh my goodness.
But that was think about it. They thought if they showed an ankle, it would get a man all excited. So, you just didn't do those kind of things.
Right.
Hot and bothered, you didn't need to do that. So cutting your hair was not something you did lightly. Even in Remember Little Women, when Jo comes home with her hair cut, how horrified they are.
Yes.
Her
one beauty.
Her one beauty, but also you just did not do that. People wore long hair. They didn't wear short hair unless there was an illness or something like that. It just wasn't done. And there weren't mavericks like there are today, where people have their hair every color of the rainbow and all that. Back then, you wanted to fit in, not to be somebody to be pointed out as, oh, wow, look at her.
Yeah, yeah. I find it fascinating that as we talk about this and we talk about, a woman would do one sampler in her life, perhaps two, and yet we have so many examples of this needlework still out there. What's the best place if I'm looking for an antique sampler? Let's say I'm looking for an antique sampler with the name Elsie on it. And I know that will take forever, but let's say I'm doing that. What's a good place to start looking?
To buy an old one?
To buy an old one.
Probably eBay.
Okay.
eBay would be my biggest choice, but like I said, if they won't take it back, you don't want it.
Yeah.
And it should give you more than one photo. Most of them come unframed, so you want to see the back as
Right.
well as the front. If you're going somewhere in person, if they won't take the back of the frame off, you don't want it.
Right, right.
Because you don't know what they've done. And if you take the back off and it hasn't been opened in 100 years, it's going to have that funky attic smell that you couldn't reproduce even if you tried. And if it doesn't, then you're suspect, because there were times when other countries flooded this country with fakes.
Really?
Yes, China for one. So you want to make sure it smells old. It does have some problem, whether it's dark or dirty or whatever. If it's pristine and all that, I mean, I go on eBay and laugh at some of these rare old, yeah, forget it, it isn't. I mean, first of all, if you're a needlewoman, you know that's something that probably came out of the 80s.
Right.
So you want to be able to see both front and back to make sure that you're not getting something you don't want. And if you do, you want to be able to give it back.
Okay.
All right, Pat. So here we are, and it's 2018, and we want to stitch a reproduction sampler. So what's the best way to go about that?
Well, get the sample. You've got to love your sampler. If you don't love it, don't buy it. You know, unless there's a good reason why you have to have it. You know, and I like some of the designers, like Wendy from
Pineberry?
Pineberry Lane,
Oh.
who's taking elements of old samplers and making new with it. I love that, and I think that's a great way to honor the old sampler. But if you're going to do a reproduction, you can change the colors, but it's no longer a reproduction, girls. If you change the color, you've just changed the whole piece. You know, Quaker samplers were done in very vibrant colors. They're not vibrant today. They're 200 years old. They're not vibrant. So if you make them vibrant, it's no longer a reproduction.
Right.
If you use...
It's still your piece.
It's
and
still
you can
your
still
piece.
love it.
But you're not... Don't call it a reproduction, because it isn't any longer a reproduction.
Okay.
Okay? It isn't. And anywhere you do a reproduction, if you want to put your initials in it, you can do in the alphabet. Hopefully it would come, you would be DR. And you would be DRB, which is hard because, so you would put D in the first set, R in the second set, and B in the third set. You would highlight it by maybe one stitch, one hue difference in the color you're using.
So not extravagant.
Not extravagant, just a little bit different, and maybe you would do a stitch instead of a non-stitch, just
Okay.
to make it show up. Remember, these little girls were illiterate, so they would do that in their samplers, so they could pick out their initials without having to go through the whole alphabet. You know, God forbid they were a Z. You know, and they couldn't remember they were the last letter.
Yeah.
So they would do something to help them, or they would put a box on their piece and put their initials in the box.
Okay.
So that they could find them quickly, so they wouldn't have to go through all that.
Okay. When
So-
we're looking at it and there are places that have worn away or there are threads missing, do we
If-
go ahead and complete those?
If you're anal, you probably want to. If you're doing a reproduction and it's been charted that way, that's the way whatever institution has okayed it wants it done. If you want to change it again, it's an adaptation, it's no longer a reproduction.
Okay.
But yeah, this is faded away for a reason. So honor the little girl who did it. Yeah, I know it's hard not to put it back in, but if you want it to be a true reproduction, you don't put it back in. You don't.
So as we're here, you know, as consumers and as stitchers, there's so many wonderful reproduction charts out there. I just purchased one called Above the Sky, Marianne Raywood.
Yep.
Leanne's beautiful, beautiful reproduction sampler, which I'm hoping to start on my birthday, so we'll see.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
That's a good one to do.
There are so many out there,
And she does show the old sampler.
and she does. Leanne
So, and
does.
she was very accurate in the reproduction, which is good for her. I mean,
Yes.
she's really wanted to do this for a long time, and I really wish her well that she
Yes,
does
indeed.
really well. She's already in the works with more.
I'm very excited. Hands Across the Sea does a beautiful job as well. Lots of pictures of the original, lots of history in their charts. So I encourage you, if you have been one of those people who says, I'm never stitching a sampler, I'm not a sampler stitcher, give it a try. They're kind of addictive. Michelle Bendy Stitchy would agree with me, I think, on that. Pat, we thank you so much for your time today.
One more thing.
One more
Sorry.
thing.
When you look at a sampler, if you're not a sampler person, really give it a look. This child gave it a year of their life. If you really look at them, you're going to learn something about that child. Not the English as much as the Americans, because they put a border in, the border's in the way, they just go right through the border. You know, they didn't care. And if you come back, we'll do some 1800s and show you. They don't care. They just went right through it, which shows the child. Sort of like when Blackbird does a piece and they interrupt the border and put a leaf through it. Well, those girls didn't even bother to do that. They just went right through the border and stitched right over it. Okay, this is in the way, I'm going. Give it a minute, because this is sometimes the only record we have of a child. Because women, children were not valued. They weren't always put on a registry.
Yeah.
Sometimes they were put on a registry and we go back and they died at 9 months old. But we have Fanny Mott, who's 11 years old. She's the second Fanny, because they kept naming the children the same name until it stuck and the child lived to 5. Then they'd move on to another name.
Oh my goodness.
So this is sometimes the only way we can say this child lived. So even if you think it's the ugliest thing in the world, give it a minute, because she might charm you.
And just honor those needle women,
Yes.
and men who came before us. There
And
were a few boys.
You were asking me about that. Boys did them when they were ill in this country. If they broke a bone, they might have been dying. The Margaret Strawn Museum in upper state New York has a little boy sampler. He was actually dying, and he says, "Fear God,"
Oh my goodness.
on his piece. I reproduced one, Julian Chamberlain. He was from Maryland, and he broke his leg. He actually got better and got married. And then another one I did was George Eisenbray, which is a very small marking sampler that his sister gave to a museum in D.C., and she very nicely told us that he had done something horrible. And his parents wanted him to learn manners, so he was sent to the girls' school to learn manners. Unfortunately, she never told us what it was.
Oh darn! I want to know.
But he's in the Daughter of the Revolutionary War Museum in the DAR in Washington, and at the very end, his little 1826 floats up like, yippee, I'm done. But he had to attend school with the girls every week and stitch on his piece.
Oh my
So
goodness.
there were a variety of reasons why boys did them, but they did not do them as an everyday thing. They were far more important than that. But to fill time and that kind of thing, yes, they certainly did do them. That's why there's not a plethora of boy samplers.
Yes.
We have one. He's Scottish, and we own a boy sampler. Hard to find. But for the most part, little boys did not do them. Little girls did them. And where you came in the family is where you did your sampler. If you were the oldest child, you probably didn't do your sampler until you were older, because you were needed at home to help with the kids. So the 8, 9, 10-year-olds went to school first, and the older kids went after, or their sisters would teach them when they came home.
Nice.
Sort of like homeschooling.
There we go. Pat, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This has been a delight as always. I could sit with my friend Pat for hours. She tells the most fascinating stories, not only about samplers, but about history in general. It's always a pleasure, so I really do thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, see you later, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. So what did you think? Isn't Pat an amazing woman? Her depth of knowledge astounds me all the time. I love to just sit and chat with her about almost anything, and she has tidbits to share that I never knew. I also love to go to their house and just stare at all of their antique samplers. I'm hoping that we can visit with Pat for a part 2 in the future where she'll talk about more of their samplers. In the meantime, I wanted to show you my one antique sampler. This was a gift, and here it is. So it says Helena Mansell Evans, 53. So I'm assuming 1853. I love this sampler so much. The fact that it's all red, which is amazing, that it's simple and not too large, and I love especially that it says, "Fear the Lord, worship thy God." This meant so much to me, and it was a great gift. Pat and Ann, thank you so much. It really is such a blessing to just kind of walk by it every day and go, "Oh, look at that little piece of history hanging on my wall." As Pat gave you some really good advice about trying to buy your own antique samplers, make them yours though. Look for a date that's meaningful to you, a name that's meaningful to you, a motif. For me, it was the references to the Lord. As someone who walks daily in my faith, this meant a great deal to me, so it was the perfect gift. I also talked quite a bit about Above the Sky, which is Leanne of 1897 Schoolhouse Samplers. This is her first reproduction sampler chart. It's glorious. It's so beautiful. Marianne Raywood, 1818. And this chart, the paper is such great quality. It's heavy, it's slightly textured. Beautiful picture of the work on the front. On the back is the picture of the original antique sampler. So gorgeous, right? And inside, she's got some pictures right in the front, right there. Now, just a little bit kind of saying how she and her husband are caretakers of a school. They live in a school, an old school. And a little bit about herself inside, a little bit about friends and family who have helped her along the journey of reproducing a sampler in this form. Beautiful, beautiful chart that I won't show you. My husband was teasing me and said, "Don't show the chart." But I will tell you, this is stunning. Leanne is also working on her second one called Hearts Aflutter. So if you follow 1897 Schoolhouse Samplers on either Facebook or Instagram, you can see her work on that as she's progressed through reproducing that original. Can't wait for its release. I am hoping to start this sampler for my birthday in July. So if any of you are interested in joining me, I am a slothful stitcher. You'll probably finish before me if you do join along, but this one's going to be a great one. I've already purchased the fabric. It's an R R Reproductions fabric. Of course, they're my favorites. This is a 32 count French vanilla, and it has just slight modeling, beautiful, beautiful, rich, warm color to do this sampler on. So I'm really excited. I talked about the fact that this is my 10th video and that that's a nice milestone for me. Another milestone is about to happen. I am very close to having 2,500 subscribers to my channel. I'm blown away by this. It's amazing to me that folks watch me and like the videos, like the information that's given, and actually subscribe to my channel. I'm so grateful. Truly. It warms my heart and makes my day to see that many people interested in needlework as we celebrate the needle women and needle men who came before us. In honor of these 2,500 of you, almost, that have subscribed to my channel. Next episode, I'll be talking about a little giveaway to celebrate that. So do stay tuned for my next installment, which will be FlossTube number 11. This is FlossTube number 10. So in number 11, I'll be talking about that giveaway. And until then, I hope you're all having a thoughtful Memorial Day, this very special day when we honor those who gave the ultimate sacrifice to ensure our freedoms. I hope that you celebrate it, that you remember those who came before us, who secured the life that we enjoy. I hope that you're having time with family or even just a quiet day at home. It's raining here in Virginia Beach, and so we're having just a quiet day at home with Scarlett and just kind of enjoying the quiet time. Until we meet again, my friends, I invite you to be the grace and the kindness that you want to see in our world. Bye-bye.
If I just say the words, is that enough to make them true? If I just say the words, well, you know that I love you. I try to open up my heart so that you can see the truth. If I just say the words, well, you know that I love you. Yes, I do. I love you.